India is the fastest-growing major economy, yet the average household feels structurally poorer. This video explores the Great Indian Growth paradox. While the macroeconomy is scaling, we see household debt at an all-time high of 17.6% of GDP and private consumption at a 20-year low at 3%. The undeniable nominal boom shows a six-fold jump in 25 years. GDP per capita is projected to rise from $443 in 2000 to $2,813 in 2026. The aggregate economy has quadrupled in real terms, suggesting a strong average citizen's top-line revenue. While this nominal jump is historic, it has set an incredibly high bar for the cost of living. What once constituted a comfortable middle-class income is now merely the baseline for urban survival. India is pivoting from subsistence to aspiration, as seen in the aspirational turn. Mean per capita consumption expenditure is up significantly. However, there's a squeeze on basics like food, while spending flows into conveyance, durable goods, and processed foods, masking growing structural fragility. Food expenditure has dropped to 39% in urban areas and 46% in rural areas, and cereal consumption, the ultimate staple, is visibly shrinking. In its place, spending is flowing into conveyance, which 8.59% in urban areas, 7.17% in durable goods, and 10.64% in processed foods/beverages. The micro-reality shows a top-line growth versus a bottom-line squeeze. While general CPI remains within the RBI tolerance band, aggregate household debt to GDP has exploded to 17.6% in 2025. This fills the gap between nominal wages and the actual cost of living. Urban MPCE reached Rs 6,996 in 2023-24, having doubled in just over a decade. However, because this growth is not backed by rising real wages, aggregate household debt has exploded to 17.6%, up from 2.2% in 1999. The culprit is gatekeeper inflation, outpacing general CPI. These non-negotiable costs for upward mobility include private education, healthcare, and urban housing, with structural inflation rates double that of general CPI, significantly outpacing average household salary growth. Private education inflation is 10 to 12% annually. Household spending rose 4.6x from FY12 to FY24, effectively doubling every 6 to 7 years. Healthcare. Medical inflation is 11.5%, well above the 9.8% global average. Urban housing prices are outpacing incomes. The 50-city index rose 5% year-on-year, while Gurugram surged 22.8% in 1 year. The impact is compounding when core non-negotiable expenses double every 6 years, but salaries rise only 6 to 8% nominally. Household net margins collapse. The household profit and loss statement reveals why a larger salary in 2026 buys less freedom. The cost of housing has surged from about 5 times annual income in the 2000s to 8 to 10 times today. Education and health costs are doubling, actively shrinking net margins for the household. The inflation wedge illustrates why 5.22% general CPI feels like 15%. Education and food inflation rates are significantly higher, eroding household wealth. General CPI is 5.22% as of December 2024. This is the number policymakers use, but it is a misleading anchor. The CFPI of 8.39% for the Consumer Food Price Index, driven by a 26.56% rise in vegetable prices. The education sector is facing 10 to 12% hyperinflation that remains invisible in general indices, such as the general CPI, but destroys household wealth. Planning a family's future based on the general CPI guarantees structural undersaving. The lived experience of inflation is roughly double the official rate, meaning the middle class is effectively being taxed out of existence. The K-shaped reality reveals a tale of two economies. The top 1% informal sector are seeing massive gains. However, the bottom 20% in informal sector face stagnant real wages, masking national growth. India's per capita ranking is 150th globally out of 195 nations. The bottom 20% in the informal sector account for only 8.8% of total consumption expenditure. Furthermore, the richest 5% now spend 10x more than the poorest 5%. The decade divide shows how the rules evolved from the 2000s to 2026. Key metrics, from housing costs to household debt and gatekeeper inflation, have drastically increased. Traditional wealth paths like savings and property accumulation no longer guarantee stability against structural inflation. The gains of the formal sector are effectively masking the stagnation of the median citizen. The traditional middle-class pathways to wealth creation, steady jobs and property accumulation have broken down. The urban survival matrix for 2026 highlights the challenge. Housing price appreciation in key cities like Gurugram and Bangalore is surging. For an entry-level professional, the math simply does not work. In cities like Gurugram and Bangalore, housing appreciation is outstripping salary growth at a pace that makes building equity through real estate an impossible dream. The paradox is resolved. The macro triumph is real but narrow, driven by the formal sector. However, the middle-class balance sheet is broken because gatekeeper expenses have outpaced wage growth. The result is a debt squeeze as households maintain standards by substituting savings with high debt. India is not suffering from an illusion of wealth, but is experiencing a structural reallocation of wealth toward the top tier of the formal sector. The average citizen feels poorer because, on a net margin basis, they objectively are. The core takeaway is that financial stability is the prerequisite for freedom, not the result of it, in an economy defined by structural inflation and high relative deprivation. We must address the massive relative deprivation of the vulnerable middle class.